And should you go order? Just tell them it's proposition, opposition, it's like
Yeah, sure.
Solve that problem. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Oh, warm water. We just drink out the jug. Shall we get this rolling then?
Sorry, is time stop for points of information?
No.
Okay, thank you.
So first minute and last minute protected?
Yeah, first minute, last minute are protected. Points of information.
Try and make them brief.
No barracking. We're very strict on that. No barracking. Other than that, it's the 6 minute format. I'm sure you've all. I presume most of you have debated before. Yeah. I think I recognise some of you guys from last year.
You're finding a way to start.
Sorry. Anyway, yeah. Shall we get this going then? Who's first?
Do you guys want to go?
You should go ahead.
Okay, so 6 minutes, you can start.
Okay, so first with this motion, what we need to define is what is unethical. The dictionary defines unethical as not morally correct. Well then, obviously we've got to ask who defines the morals, and in this case, it's the government. And the government is a good barometer of what morals are because they take a moral average because they are democratically elected. Because they're democratically elected, all the morals of the people voting for them are collected in the one point. So therefore, they have a good understanding of what the whole country wants as a whole morally. So moving on, the government has a higher taxation on typically non-ethical businesses, such as places that sell alcohol or tobacco. There's alcohol duty, specifically on wine, beer and spirits. This already reinforces the fact that we should tax higher on businesses that sell non-ethical products. Tobacco is another
on that point, Madam Chairman. The first speaker from the proposition defined unethical as something which is immoral, and she said that would be determined by the government. The opposition understand the term unethical to mean against a person's conscience, as ethics is something which is defined by each individual person.
I'd like to say that in this case, because we are talking about taxation and how taxation is implemented, that it is the government and individual people vote for the party that is in government, so ergo it is a good barometer, as I said. Okay, moving on.
Point, madam.
Fine, fair enough.
You say that the government is the best barometer for measuring what is moral and immoral, but how could this be when in the case of taxes they have a bias to define more things as being moral in order to profit from the tax they will receive if your motion was to be passed, impose higher taxes on immoral businesses?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that?
You're saying that the government is the best source of what is moral and immoral, but in the case where the government can profit, in this case the government are biased towards saying that more things are immoral than in what is reality because they can profit from increasing taxes if your motion was to go forward.
Yes, okay. Well, I get that point, but I'm talking about that if governments acted the way they should, which they usually do, it would solve itself, and it would be only on non-ethical products that the taxes would be raised. So moving on. Unethical businesses should be taxed higher because of what they put back into the world. As I was saying, the tobacco industry costs the taxpayer $2 billion a year alone in NHS. Surely they should sort of pay the taxpayer back because they are costing the taxpayer so much money. And for example, even more in alcohol space.
On that point, Madam Chairman.
Okay.
The first speaker ignores the fact that the alcohol industry itself employs almost 1.5 million people in the UK and contributes 10 billion to the UK economy every year. This is a significant economic benefit to our economy, and to say that they need to pay back a deficit which doesn't exist is ridiculous.
Okay, I'll take that point and reissue the fact that yes, it puts that amount of money. Yes, it puts that money back in, but they should have to. Because because it's a non-ethical product in the traditional sense, it should have to be, they should have to put money into it because that is a severely underestimated figure, the 6 billion. So yes, it could balance itself out. I do get what you're saying, but I still do think that they should pay some back because, at least because it is a non-ethical product. So I'd like to talk about also that not even in our own country, but in other countries as well, we should push for higher taxation because, as a point might be raised, that if we higher taxes on unethical businesses, they might move. But if all countries work together, which in theory they could, that way it would be good for the economy as well, for the economy of the world to raise the taxes because the global for ethical companies is good for the wider economy, and in several economic and business people that my partner will reiterate in the future will agree with us. Famous cases like tax evasion of like Google and Starbucks, they should be taxed higher because it sets an example that big companies who have unethical practices can't get past us. It should matter how big or how small the business is. If it has found unethical practices against the law and legislation of the UK, it should be able to, they should have to pay for their efforts unethically. Finally, I'd like to talk about responsibility. Finally, we as a people have the responsibility not to cheat the system. I think that most moral people, many of whom in Britain are business owners, don't want to cheat the system. They don't want to cheat the legislation that, the bare minimum of legislation that we do push through in the government. And companies have in their own self-interests to be ethical. Because foremost, the government have a responsibility to the electorate to make sure that the business that people use, that consumers use, must be upholding their ethical sense of standards. That's why, say, in the case of Ashers, they were taken to the Equality Commission. They were found to be unethical, even though they appealed it. Thank you.
That's very good, thank you very much. And next step. Can I just clarify that you're not looking to us for points of information, you obviously accept them yourself? Just so you're aware, okay?
Madam Chairman, members of the proposition and members of the floor. The opposition strongly contests the motion that this House will tax unethical business hire. To begin, I'd first like to raise one of the proposition's arguments. The first speaker from the proposition argued about the Google tax, or about Google, but I'd first like to point you towards the Google tax, also known as the diverted profits tax, which was introduced to target unethical business regarding tax avoidance. The rate at which the diverted profit tax stands at is 25%, yet in 2013, Google paid a mere £20 million on estimated profits of nearly £4 billion, a rate of only 0.5%. As first speaker from the Abbey Grammar School, I would find it only appropriate to clearly outline how we view and define the motion. The opposition understands the term tax to mean an involuntary fee levied on individuals or corporations that is enforced by the government to finance governmental activities as defined by Investopedia. We understand the term unethical to mean against a person's conscience as defined by the Washington Post. Furthermore, the Oxford Dictionary defines business as commercial activity. And finally, we have interpreted higher to mean greater than the current level. Therefore, the proposition have suggested that we should enforce an involuntary fee greater than the current level on individuals and corporations, which is against a person's conscience in order to finance governmental activities. A suggestion, Madam Chairman, which the opposition wholeheartedly disagrees with, and a concept which Mr McComsky will later demolish as unworkable, unethical in itself, and ludicrous. In my argument, I intend to discuss the impracticality of defining exactly what constitutes as unethical business, and thus the impracticality of imposing the suggested higher tax, whereas my colleague Mr. McComiskey will discuss a range of notoriously perceived unethical business activities and alternative, more prosperous solutions to the issue. In the United Kingdom, we live in a society which comprises conflicting religions and beliefs, and thus a society which comprises conflicting ethics. The idea of imposing higher taxes for unethical business is completely ludicrous when each person has their own concept of what the term unethical actually means and accept.
We legislate about ethics all the time. We prohibit murder, we prohibit taking drugs, despite the fact those could be seen as personal issues. We prohibit terrorism, we prohibit all kinds of things that may be in favour of one person's conscience. The democratic process is what decides ethics about society.
Murder is illegal for the reason it's unethical. Drug abuse is illegal for the reason it's unethical. If we truly believe that businesses are so unethical, their opposition are suggesting that they should be outlawed and take a firm stance rather than imposing higher taxes. Let's look at real-world examples that expose the impracticality of such a tax. Firstly, the Bible condemns homosexuality as an immoral and unethical sin. Leviticus chapter 18 verse 22 states, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman, it is an abomination." So let's imagine that an Englishman goes into his local bakery and is quoted a price of £200 for a wedding cake. Yet when he asks for the figures of 2 grooms to be placed on top of the cake, he is quoted a price of £250 for the simple reason that some people believe gay marriage to be unethical. Some people might argue that gambling is unethical with the view that certain people benefit at the expense of others. The National Lottery is a form of gambling. Yes, the profit generated is funded into various projects, including education, community relations, social welfare, etc. However, some people are still unable to look beyond the unethical activity which funds it. And the good deed of funding community projects is tainted by this unethical activity. As an analogy, let's imagine I offered everyone in this room £100,000. That seems like an attractive proposition, doesn't it? Now let's imagine that I told you that I stole the money on the way to the debate today, and suddenly when you discover the source of the money, the good deed is immediately tainted by the unethical activity which funds it.
On that point,
I accept.
would you not accept that it would still be better for that money, however it was obtained and raised, to be used by the government for ethical purposes rather than just to go into the wages of the unethical company and the people who benefit directly from their unethical actions?
To refer to my earlier argument, the opposition determine unethical as against a person's conscience, and this is a decision to be made by individuals. If certain people believe certain activities to be unethical, the good deed is tainted by the activity which funds it. The opposition are suggesting that we allow individuals to decide whether they believe that a company is so unethical that they will stop exchanging in business with them. In conclusion, Madam Chairman, the proposition's suggestion that we should tax unethical business higher is simply ludicrous when we consider the ambiguity which surrounds the term unethical. As unethical can be described as against a person's conscience, I'll decline. It is not justifiable or ethical, in fact, for the government to define a finite and subjective list of unethical business activities when this is a decision to be made by individuals. As Mr. McComiskey will later argue, imposing higher tax for perceived unethical business is most certainly not the solution. I therefore urge the members of the House to support the opposition and pass this or decline this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, from there you go.
Madam Chair, we should tax unethical business in order to protect our environment, increase the health of our population, and lead to an increased innovation. The main point I wish to focus on is that businesses must take responsibility for the negative effects that their products produce. There are 3 main arguments I wish to put forward. The first is that we should tax companies which pollute the environment. The second is that we should make companies pay for the social ramifications which their products cause. And the third is that taxing unethical products will lead to innovation towards a more ethical business structure. And lastly, I would wish to offer arguments against my opponent. We must acknowledge how important our environment is. It is essential to our survival and well-being, and also to the continued future of our economy. The cost of pollution alone is estimated at £54 billion a year, with 29,000 premature deaths. Therefore, we should tax businesses who pollute the environment because their unethical practices affect us all negatively, and they do not pay for these costs in their own business costs. This will decrease pollution and increase the cost of business of polluting, and so they will move away from a polluting business structure and attempt to be more green. This will lead to a healthier population and a society in which the environment is properly protected. I wish to expand on the point made by the first speaker. In economics, goods which cause negative effects to third parties are referred to as demerit goods. These goods are goods like alcohol and tobacco and arguably gambling. The companies which produce these goods do not pay for these negative consequences.
Are you suggesting that we tax any company who uses fossil fuels as they are a detriment to our environment? As a result, so many small businesses who can't afford green energy would be severely affected by this tax.
I put it to you that small businesses, we should not place small economic growth over the health of our planet, because if we ignore the health of our planet, there won't be an economy that we have. It will lead to destruction. It will lead to a devaluing of our economy. As I said, air pollution alone costs us £54 billion a year. That is a huge amount, and decreasing that cost would inevitably lead to economic growth. When you buy goods like tobacco, like alcohol, you're not actually paying for the full cost. You're paying the cost that the company wants you to pay. But the social cost isn't paid by you.
On that point, Madam Chairman.
I accept.
The second speaker for the proposition said that gambling alcohol is arguably unethical. If we were to adopt the approach that something might arguably unethical, that immediately demonstrates the flaws in the proposition's argument.
Well, of course, everything is arguable. I mean, we're having a debate. Everything is arguable. I'm not saying that with everything I say is with moral certainty unethical. I'm saying that the democratic process should decide what the government decides is unethical, and therefore what we tax as unethical. In order to bring the consumption of goods that are demerit goods down, we must make people pay extra in order to pay for the social costs. And therefore bring the consumption of these goods more towards a socially optimum level. My third point is that taxing businesses will lead to innovation. This was a point illustrated by the great economist Milton Friedman. Businesses are primarily concerned with profits. We all know it's true. That's why businesses exist. And businesses, if they see their profits threatened by being unethical, will therefore choose to be ethical, because it becomes profitable to be ethical.
If your tax is supposed to be a deterrent to these companies, if you are serious about trying to stop animal testing, your tax had better be larger than the profits made in the East Asian cosmetics market, where animal testing is mandatory. If you're serious about ending the exploitation of workers, your tax had better be bigger than the savings made from this endless supply of cheap labour. If you are serious about making business less efficient and less affordable, your tax will be in the billions of pounds.
I put it to you that it will not make business less efficient and less affordable. It will make business more efficient. In the short term, it may cause some negative effects in that companies will have to fire their sweatshop workers. But would it not be better to tax companies to make them fire their sweatshop workers so that they actually have to pay someone a decent wage, and so that they innovate to make their costs lower? In conclusion, if we had taxed unethical businesses higher, it would lead to a cleaner, more environmentally friendly planet, a world in which people take responsibility for the social ramifications of the products they consume, and greater innovation for companies who will in turn become ethical. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Next up.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the floor. I, along with the rest of the opposition, am here to rebuke the absurd motion this House would tax unethical business hire, which has been brought forward by the proposition. Firstly, before I start my speech, I would like to address what the second speaker of the proposition was saying. He was saying that we should increase the taxes on businesses who cause severe damage to the environment. And to allude to what my colleague Mr. Foster has already said, surely the tax would have to be so severe and large that it becomes infeasible and impractical to impose. It would collapse businesses, and therefore it would not be a deterrent on people. Would rather pay your reasonable tax than lose all the savings they get from being from abusing the environment. So surely to save the world you love clearly so much, higher taxes is not the way. Surely those businesses should be outlawed. As Mr. Lowry earlier argued, no, thank you. As Mr. Lowry earlier argued, it is virtually impossible to define what qualifies as unethical due to the wide array of conflicting ethics which exist in our society. In my argument, I intend to address a range of notoriously perceived unethical business activities and the ineffectiveness of imposing higher taxes on such activities. Firstly, I would like to discuss tax avoidance, something I'm sure the majority of people in the room would describe as being unethical. Imposing higher taxes on business that avoids paying its taxes is a nonsensical idea. It seems very unlikely that a business which has thus far been successful in avoiding paying tax will pay this new tax. A perfect example of this is the diverted profit tax that was recently introduced, and Google, who in January 2016 paid £130 million to the UK government in taxes, which is a relatively small amount of money considering that this amount refers to the last decade. No, thank you. To put this in context, Google paid just over 20 million in taxes in 2013 on sales of almost £4 billion. That's 0.5% compared to the new tax rate which was introduced of 25%.
On that point?
No, thank you. It is clear from this example that when a higher tax was imposed on Google, nothing changed. They only paid 1/50th of the imposed tax.
On that point?
I'll check.
While the new tax rate was not collected in its entirety, some new money was raised, and surely some money for the government is better than nothing at all.
Yes, 1/50th of what it was supposed to be. I am sure the fat cats at Google are crying over the £20 million they've just lost. In 2010, she would have showed the world how grossly unethical.
On that point.
No, thank you. In 2010, Toyota showed the world how grossly unethical they are when they ignored information about safety and delayed investigating possible recalls after learning about sticking accelerator pedals and dodgy brakes. Instead of addressing the issue, they ignored it. In some cases, Toyota faced accusations of hiding evidence for hundreds of cases involving deaths and rollovers, putting their drivers and passengers at risk. Ask yourself, is it good enough for the government to punish a multinational corporation with higher taxes, a corporation who is willing to let their customers die until their secret was revealed?
On that point?
No, thank you. Will higher taxes make these cars safer? Will higher taxes prevent the deaths of hundreds of passengers? Surely you would want such an unethical business to be banned from trading here, which is the action that must be taken to prevent them from endangering our lives. The final activity which makes an unethical business that I'm going to discuss is slave labour. Slave labour is a cornerstone of mega profits for the world's biggest multinational corporations. Even the most popular companies use slave labour. One such company is Apple, and it relies on child slave labour that is working in dangerous conditions for 10 hours each day while being exposed to cancerous vapours. The conditions at Apple's primary manufacturing plant Foxconn are so bad that they had to install anti-suicide nets. So the question is, would taxing these unethical multinational corporations higher be the best way to stop them using slave labour? Considering that most of these multinational corporations are already doing their best to avoid tax, then you would have to conclude that taxing them higher is not the most effective way to stop slave labour. No, thank you. A much more effective method would be to make it illegal for goods to be sold in the UK that were made using slave labour. If we look at the effect this would have on a company like Apple, who had sales of over £6 billion in the UK in 2012, that's over 10% of their global sales. Based on their enormous sales, it seems likely that Apple would abandon slave labour in order to prevent their sales from going pear-shaped. Prohibiting the sale of a company's products which engages in unethical activities would provide a firmer and ultimately more effective solution. In conclusion, Madam Chairman, the opposition have exposed the proposition's feeble attempt to overcome unethical business by imposing higher taxes, thus creating a two-tier tax system. Mr. Lavery exposed the impracticalities of defining the term unethical, and even if the government developed a finite and subjective list of unethical activities, I've outlined the reasons as to why higher tax would be ineffective in cases of tax avoidance, payday loans, gross negligence and slave labour. I therefore ask you, the members of the House, to support the opposition and decline this motion.
Alright then, thank you very much. Next up.
Madam Chairperson, fellow members of the opposition and members of the House, I am here today to argue that the House should vote for the motion that we should tax unethical businesses higher. My argument will focus mainly around 2 points. That unethical businesses deserve to be taxed more to pay the costs that they face to society, such as the NHS or the fire brigades, but also that the tax should not only be increased via rates, etc., but we should try and eradicate loopholes in our system to recover some of this lost tax. But first, let me start out by defining the motion. The opposition seem to prefer to use papers to define their motion, but we here in the opposition, we like to use dictionaries. The OED define unethical as not morally correct. Now, as the opposition have said, that there may be concerns in what is not morally correct, as the proposition have already said. Also, we feel that the Parliament as a democratic body are the best placed people to define what is morally and not morally correct, as Jack will further talk about in his speech. I'd like to open with my first point, that unethical businesses deserve to be taxed higher to pay their social costs. I accept.
What makes a Westminster politician more qualified than me to say what is and isn't ethical? Do we vote for politicians to tell us what we believe is moral? We don't. We vote for policies regarding employment, industry and investment, all of which would suffer under the policy you propose.
Sir, I would pose to you that if you are voting, then surely you are voting for a person to represent you, and you need to consider all kind of aspects of their personality and their voting mentality when they look at when they are voting for these kinds of policies. Surely, if you want to change the policy, you should vote for someone else. You shouldn't just say, well, nobody else looks at what I am wanting to do. I do not understand quite what you're trying to get at, sir. To begin, I'd like to talk about the think tank Policy Exchange. The Daily Mail said that they're the largest think tank on the right side. They have said that approximately £14 billion per year are the expenditure
on that point,
of smoking.
Madam Chairman.
I accept.
The proposition suggestion that the government are the best placed people to deal with unethical business is simply ludicrous. The government would be gaining as a consequence of an unethical business tax, and therefore they would clearly demonstrate an element of bias.
I accept where you're coming from. The government itself, so the body including David Cameron and the Conservative Party that are currently in power, may benefit in some way or another, but Parliament, which is democratically elected, will surely take in everybody's views, and when things go to the House, in the Commons, everybody gets to vote. It's not just the government and the Conservative Party who choose what gets passed. If I was to continue, as I was saying, £14 billion approximately are spent by the government on smoking costs. These include approximately £2.7 billion on the NHS, but also great costs due to lost work productivities and fire incidents that are caused by smoking. If we look at what the tobacco industry are paying to the government, it's reckoned to be about £12 billion. Approximately £9.5 billion of this is in tobacco duty, and £2.5 billion is paid to the Treasury in value-added tax. As the opposition have said, £20 million may not be a lot of money, but I'm very confident the education system, the NHS and the government as a whole could do well with an extra £2 billion. Yes, I accept.
Surely a tax on unethical business would allow the government to profit off these sinful acts and do nothing to stop these actions.
I feel that the government are there to help the people, so it's not the government who are gaining if more tax is being spent, it's everyone in the who is gaining from education. In fact, it is everyone as a whole, because if education improves, or the healthcare system improves, then everyone benefits. How does someone lose out from these systems improving? It's not like David Cameron is saying, I'm going to take this £2 billion and spend it on a new mansion. He's putting it into areas which we need to focus on, areas like the NHS. And my second point I raised was that we need to recover tax. We don't only need to raise tax. The opposition seem to be very keen on saying that Google are only paying £150 million of tax. But where is this extra tax going? Well, I pose to you that we need to close loopholes in our tax system. There is currently about £26 billion a year that is being lost in uncollected tax. This is about 50-50 split between income tax and VAT.
On that point, Madam Chairman.
I accept.
You've suggested that we need to close loopholes in our tax system. If our current legal system is currently flawed with regards to tax, it's ludicrous to suggest we would incorporate a new law to tax unethical businesses when the current law is unethically flawed. We need to correct our current law before we can even think about implementing a new law.
That is exactly what I'm suggesting, member of the opposition. I'm suggesting we need to close these loopholes to increase tax revenues. I'm not sure how you are suggesting that we should just go, no, our tax system is not working, let's do nothing. What we here in the proposition are suggesting is that we need to work on our tax system. We can only fix problems if we work on them over time. You can't suddenly say, well, we're going to fix the tax system with one law. It's not feasible. We need to work out and work in steps towards that ultimate goal of having a tax system with effectively no loopholes. The opposition also seem to be concerned that £20 million is nothing, or effectively nothing, to Google. Well, I'm sure that the government could do with £20 million. I'm sure even their school could do with £20 million. I'd be very doubtful that the pupils would be very depressed if £20 million was lost. If they were able to get a new school, are they saying that that's really not a good thing? To conclude, as Jack is about to begin, I would like to say that my argument focuses on unethical businesses and how they should pay their social costs, and how we need to close our loopholes in the tax system to therefore increase tax for unethical businesses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the House and members of the proposition. Let us get one thing straight. We do not find business evil. We do not stage interventions, exorcisms, businessmen anonymous meetings, pilgrimages or candlelit processions for business, as business is not evil by nature. I will cover how heavily subjective ethics are, examples of what this tax would affect and how it will result for a business, the purpose of this tax, and how it harms our economy. My colleague Mr. Foster will discuss the implications of this tax, especially unemployment in the UK, and a more feasible alternative. We define the tax in this scenario to be a means of discouraging businesses from carrying out unethical actions. The tax itself is a monetary levy which we feel is a means of pushing businesses away from their unethical ways. Firstly, I would like to draw upon a few arguments from the proposition. The first speaker of the proposition claimed that if all countries worked together, we could stop this unethical business. The proposition are ignoring the truth of our world. We do not live in this elysium of pure ethics, as many countries will have different ethical situations and standings to our own. This is due to shifts in culture and religion. Therefore, we couldn't agree. You will not find a Jerry from Northern Ireland native to the east coast of Mozambique. Our ethics are not the same all over the world. I'd also like to draw upon that point. I will not accept. But I'd also like to draw upon the point of the second speaker of the proposition, who claims that heavily taxing small businesses, who are not heavily taxing small businesses for consumption of fossil fuels, will lead to a catastrophe on a biblical scale. As locusts swarm from the heavens, our small businesses are to blame for burning a bit of coal. It is the government's responsibility to make this green energy available to small businesses. You cannot tax someone for committing seemingly unethical actions without them being able to ratify their sins in the first place. It's a tax trap, I will accept.
The economist Milton Friedman, who you may know of, who's a very significant capitalist economist, said that, argued that if we tax businesses for actions which harm the rest of society, then businesses will innovate to avoid the costs, and that we will have higher economic growth in the long run. And that argument comes from a very senior and well-known economist, and he is a very pro-business economist as well.
Businesses could innovate, which would be fairly expensive, but it is more likely that they will leave to find greener pastures. Firstly, Madam Chairman, is it the function of our government, I will not accept, to enforce its own moral code with the iron fist of the law? Are the government overstepping their duty? We, the opposition, believe they are. This tax would essentially be a fine, and ethics would become a matter of legality. Ethics are an abstract construct of moral right and wrong. I will accept.
Okay. As the proposition have already stated, the law strictly defines what ethics are. Almost every law in the book has some element of ethicality about it. I could disagree with you on almost any law and say that it is unethical or ethical, as the case may be. For example, murder or tax avoidance or anything you could say is ethical or unethical. It's completely a point of view.
That is exactly the point. It is completely a point of view. Things like murder, which are more serious, unethically, tied mostly to religion back in the way back long ago. But this is more unethical practices that aren't illegal today. We're trying to make these a matter of legality, such as children in advertising, for example.
On that point,
I will not accept. In which each person has a different perspective subject to religious and cultural beliefs. A lack of social consensus on many ethical standings make it impossible for a government to reflect the people's opinion. Therefore, a tax regarding unethical business would be hypocritical in nature. Madam Chairman, what is the purpose of this tax? As we define, this tax is a means of discouraging businesses from carrying out unethical practices. If this is not the tax's purpose, then it is useless and will not stop the unrelenting blade of morals wielded by the social justice warriors that plague our society. As my colleague Mr. Foster will mention, this tax would need to be substantial in order to stop unethical actions occurring in business. This would certainly have a knock-on effect on our own economy, as the antagonised evil corporations run by Hitler, Vlad the Impaler, and God forbid, Donald Trump flee our shores, as our tax discourages them from harvesting the souls of puppies and kittens to make cheap pyjamas for Primark. The effects would be devastating. The Institute for Business Ethics conducts studies regarding ethical concerns in business in the UK. Between 2012 and 2013, the Institute recorded over 1,000 reports of unethical business behaviour, 404 of which were in the financial sector. Over 2 million Brits are employed in the financial sector, and in the event of this tax, many could lose their jobs as evil finance giants slither away from the UK to greener pastures. To conclude, a tax on unethical business would not be feasible due to the abstract nature of ethics and morals. One cannot pop a balloon if you were missing the air to fill it. Many very commonplace industrial practices would be penalised profusely without the power to put a pin on the paramount limit. Apologies, I'm trying to annul this alliteration annoyance. Thus, as a result, many companies would flee, leaving us with the charred remains of a farm for experiment rabbits and many thousands more unemployed. Utilitarianism in business is what makes profit. This profit fuels our society. Taxing the behaviour some find morally wrong will hinder this process and thus will not bring the most good for the greatest amount of people. Thus, the tax itself is unethical, ethically speaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very good. What's up?
Madam Chairman, members of the opposition, members of the proposition, ladies and gentlemen. By definition, unethical businesses do things that are morally wrong and not in the public interest. For example, alcohol and tobacco companies benefit off people's drug addictions. They encourage people's drug addictions. These companies are little more than legal drug dealers. They're responsible for the deaths of millions. they are unethical. It is the duty of the state, as the protector of its citizens, to minimise and discourage the promotion of lethal drugs by these companies. As was made obvious in 1920s America, prohibition banning these drugs and these companies is ineffective. Therefore, the state must look to other methods of reducing the influence of these companies, other than an outright ban. Charging these companies more tax is the fairest means of doing this.
On that point, Madam
As
Chairman.
Ben outlined, this extra As Ben outlined, this extra tax covers the disproportionate harm of. As Ben outlined, this extra tax covers the disproportionate amount of harm and government expenditure that these businesses are responsible for. Yes.
Can you accept my point now?
Yes.
Madam Chairman, the proposition speaker argued that alcohol and tobacco companies benefit at the expense of others. I'd like to point out that accountants benefit at the expense of others, lawyers benefit at the misfortune of others as well. If we were to look at this across our society, business benefits at the expense of others. We can't tax everybody higher.
We believe that lawyers may benefit off the misfortune of others, whereas the misfortune caused by alcohol and tobacco companies who actively go out to seek to encourage people to become addicted to their drugs. Lawyers don't go out and make people victims of crime so they can represent them in court. We believe that alcohol and tobacco companies are a completely different thing. They're dealing with people's lives, not just people's misfortune. I will not accept. This tax will act as a major deterrent to these companies. The extra tax will result in less profit, less in dividends to the company's shareholders. This will reduce the company's ability to spend money promoting their harmful products to consumers. It will therefore reduce the amount of consumers who end up buying their products. Yes.
You say that we need to tax alcohol more, but alcohol, tobacco, and gambling are already incredibly heavy tax. And you say it's a deterrent to what? To exist? Can we continue to tax these companies and industries until they run into the ground? Is that your end game?
Well, we believe that we can tax them more, and if we do tax them more, fewer people will be using their products, fewer people will be dying every year from lung cancer and liver cancer caused by the promotion of these drugs. Increased taxation can reduce the profitability and therefore the negative effects of any company which profits from the misfortune of others. For example, arms manufacturers, payday loan companies, fast food chains. We in the proposition believe that taxing the company's profits is the best way to reduce their influence. The only alternative would be... I defer.
Attention. Could Terry Patterson please contact Lorraine on extension 104? Terry Patterson, please contact Lorraine on extension.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can we pause it?
Yeah.
We'll start.
Do you
when
want
you
to
start.
keep going?
Okay.
Okay.
The only alternative to taxing a company's profits would be to tax the company's products through VAT. However, this would affect the customers of the companies more so than the shareholders who are benefiting from others' misfortune. The opposition have argued that the increased taxation of unethical business would be impossible to implement because it's impossible to create an objective definition of unethical business. We believe that unethical business is easy to define. It is a company which prioritises its profits and the interests of its shareholders over the interest of its customers. It values profit over people. Yes, this may be difficult to... I'll defer. Yes, this may be difficult to translate this idea into legislation. It is not easy to translate morality into law. But that does not mean it is impossible. If you believe that morality cannot be written, even imperfectly, into law, then you must reject all criminal law, the basis of our societal structure. That is just morality written into law. We can prove if a company breaks our ethical code. We can prove if a company pollutes the environment. We can prove if a company causes its customers to suffer ill health. And the idea that politicians are not there to represent our own ethical ideas and ethical interests is completely ludicrous. Especially in Northern Ireland, we see the ethical issues, for example, abortion, go to the heart of why we elect politicians and political debate and rhetoric. Furthermore, there is a universally... there is a universally accepted idea of ethics. For example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights sets out that there is a global acceptance of what is ethical, what is right, what is wrong. When one mentions the phrase unethical business, the first example of that that pops into mind may be of the banks. And in 2011, a banking levy was introduced that creates billions of pounds for the government. And that is a completely effective method of creating a tax upon unethical industry that works, and if the tax rate was raised, would work even better. To conclude, companies which break the law, avoid tax, or profit off the misfortune of addiction and of ordinary people are unethical companies. These companies should be made to pay their fair share. They should be made to pay up what they owe. They should be made to foot the bill for the health and environmental damage they cause. They should be punished for doing the wrong thing and discouraged from doing it again. They should be made to pay more tax. As a society, we cannot let criminals walk free unpunished, so we put them in prison. Similarly, we cannot let businesses break our society's moral code and get away scot-free. Making such companies pay more tax is fair, right, and we encourage the House to support this motion.
Okay, thank you very much. And lastly?
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the House and members of the proposition. It seems to me, Madam Chairman, that the proposition, in their pursuit of some moral ideal, have lost sight of what is best for the UK. We need to encourage investment, trade and enterprise. We need to encourage employment and businesses to start up in the UK. We need a shot in the arm for British business, not a shot in the foot. As Mr. Lawrence mentioned, I'll be talking about the practicalities and implications of this tax itself, including its effect on employment and growth in this country and a more palatable alternative. But first I'd like to respond to some of the proposition's arguments. It was mentioned by the second speaker that terrorism and murder are entirely based on ethics, and that's why they're enshrined in law, but this is far from true. These are law because it affects the safety of our citizens. It is not unethical, it is not immoral, it is unsafe, which is why it's the government's concern, sir. No, thank you. It is the government's duty to protect its citizens, not involve itself with ethics. Now, it was also raised by the second speaker that we should sacrifice this small economic growth to stop pollution. Now, small and medium enterprises employ more people in this country than any other sector. This is not some negligible growth, negligible employment. This is a significant proportion of our economy, our employment and our workforce.
On that point.
I accept.
Is the Speaker arguing, therefore, that it's more important to grow the economy than save its citizens' lives whenever they are being put in danger by the peddling of drugs like tobacco, which are fatal?
I'm talking about the environment here, sir, and my point is that the amount of people who are employed, the amount of people who are given a higher quality of life than they ever would before is not unethical, it is not immoral, and the fact that it is so debatable, so arguable, shows that Westminster cannot provide a clear definition of ethics, and they will not represent the entire country. Now, it was also mentioned by our third speaker that the government could do with an extra £2 billion. That would be lovely, by the way. But why then is the Northern Ireland Executive proposing to halve its corporation tax over the next few years? It's because, Madam Chairman, they have realised that the best thing for our country is to add employment, increase investment and attract industry to our country to invigorate our lethargic economy. No thank you. Madam Chairman, I'd like to bring the debate back a little closer to home now by asking how many jobs are actually at risk in the United Kingdom. Inherently unethical business, which was defined by the proposition as alcohol, gambling and tobacco, keeps almost 2 million people at work in this country. Not to mention the millions more in these multinational Death Stars called corporations. Now, these industries are already heavily taxed and already heavily scrutinised, and they're already suffering from it. Is it too much, Madam Chairman, to overlook a slight breach of one's personal moral code when we have profited so much and for so long as an indirect result?
On that point.
I accept.
You state that the multinational corporations are paying huge amounts of tax already. They're already taxed very heavily, yet earlier in the argument, one of the opposition stated that Google are only paying £20 million of tax and they're not paying enough tax, and that's an issue.
My reference to the high amounts of tax was to inherently unethical businesses, the alcohol and tobacco, which we apparently are trying to increase the tax on to decimate the industries and stop them existing. Madam Chairman, we agree with the proposition that something needs to be done about unethical business. Now, Mr. Lawrence stressed that the government would be overstepping its duties to its citizens with this tax. I would like to further argue that it is not the government's responsibility to respond to ethics, it is yours.
On that point?
No, thank you. If you're so disgusted, so morally repulsed by a business, then stop buying their stuff.
On that point.
This doesn't require, no thank you, a restructuring of the taxation system, Madam Chairman. You, the consumer, have the ultimate power in our society.
On that point.
Yes, please.
You claim that increasing taxation will cause these companies to leave the United Kingdom and base their businesses elsewhere. Do you have any evidence for this? Because the point is, I raised the example of the bankers' levy, which increased taxation on banks, and as we saw recently with HSBC, they've decided to stay in the United Kingdom. There isn't any evidence to support your argument.
What I'm arguing is that by increasing the tax for business, we drive away potential investors and potential industries which we have seen flourish in the Republic of Ireland in the last years with very low levels of corporation tax. In short, Madam Chairman, this tax would hinder, disrupt and destabilise trade within the UK. It is your job to act on morality, not the government's, and it would be unfair and, dare I say, unethical to introduce these taxes worth billions based on opinions and nothing more. As I said at the start, Madam Chairman, what we need is a shot in the arm for British business, not a shot in the foot. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. You've all been absolutely wonderful. You've all spoken very well.